Brics leaders gathered in Johannesburg on Tuesday for the bloc's first in-person meeting since the COVID-19 pandemic. Topping the agenda of the three-day summit was the admission of new members and the possibility for the bloc to have its own currency. Due to an indictment by the International Criminal Court in March, Russian President Vladimir Putin attended the meeting virtually. After hours-long discussions, the leaders announced on Wednesday that all members have agreed to expand the bloc. Dozens of countries have earlier expressed interest in joining, but the bloc has now only invited 6 countries: Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Argentina, Ethiopia, and the UAE to become new members. On the sidelines of the summit, the group also discussed plans to reduce using the US dollar for trade. The BRICS group of emerging economies currently makes up a quarter of the global economy and accounts for a fifth of global trade. Speaking via video link, Putin said the de-dollarisation of BRICS economies is gaining pace and that the process is now irreversible. And now to discuss the BRICS summit and the further expansion of the group, joining me now from Edinburgh is Ibrahim Rasool. He is a former South African ambassador to the United States. And from Washington, D.C., Sharang Shidor. He is the director of Global South Program at Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Ibrahim, talk to us about the significance of this year's BRICS summit.
I think this year's BRICS summit is significant for more than just the fact that it is 10 years old. It has endured despite many predictions. It may not have shown enough tangible benefits for all the countries, but it has created the possibility of a more multilateral world, a shift away from the unilateralism of the United States, a growing coherence amongst the global South, a dream of an alternative currency to the dollar, because that has proven to be expensive in terms of debt costs if the dollar fluctuates too much. And certainly, I think, beginning to celebrate the existence of the new development bank that could be in local currency, that could be funding an enormous program of infrastructure development in the BRICS countries. And most importantly, the benefit this year is that BRICS has grown by 6 countries.
Yes, so it's been more than 10 years, Sharang, since BRICS admitted a new member. Already 40 countries have shown interest in joining the group. And as Ibrahim mentioned, 6 new countries will join the group. So what has pushed BRICS to expand this year?
I think BRICS has been around, as you said, for some time. And the last major turning point for BRICS was 2015, when the New Development Bank was founded. There was also an arrangement struck on providing financial stability. But the events of the last couple of years, I think, have demonstrated to the Global South that the world order is changing. We have seen the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was an illegal invasion, but the war continues, and neither side appears to be able to have a conversation to resolve it. The Global South is interested in having the war end. And so there are vacuums happening within the great power system. The great powers are falling out and paralyzed. And I think there's a push from the Global South, particularly, to have a conversation and have a forum where this can be discussed. So and indeed, I was going to say, complementary structures, as our other panelists referred to, can also be evolved to meet some of the shortfalls that the states are seeing in the current order that are not meeting their needs.
So, Ibrahim, Russian President Vladimir Putin, who attended the summit via video link, said the process of de-dollarisation is gaining pace and it's irreversible. Is this the case? I mean, can BRICS dethrone the US dollar soon?
I think BRICS is realistic enough to know that that is a medium to long-term project. I think they're going to start very small with the new development bank giving loans in local currencies of BRICS members rather than trying to replace the dollar for trade and all of those kind of things. I think that the dollar reaction is much more with regard to the volatility of the US dollar that makes both loans as well as trade more expensive, and that every time the dollar weakens, or strengthens, it has an impact on the cost of trade and lending. And so it is not an ideological move as such, but it is a efficiency move to be able to say what is the alternative to the dollar and how can we wean ourselves off the dependency of the dollar. So I think that the one idea that it could be a good ideological push against the US, I think is counterbalanced by the reality of the situation that the dollar is supreme, but that it is a medium to long-term project to reduce dependency on the dollar.
So, Sharang, will the new development bank become a serious rival to Western-led institutions? I mean, what makes the Brics Bank different than the World Bank? I mean, why is it a more attractive lender to developing countries?
I think it has a long way to go before it achieves the sort of deep pockets that the World Bank and its sister concerns have. So this is still at the early stages. I think one of the advantages from the Global South standpoint of the new development bank is that it provides loans in ways that are maybe more tailored to their needs, given that they have a significant voice in the running of the bank, which is not the case in the World Bank. The US and its very close partners dominate the World Bank system. And in the NDB, there is a possibility of these other middle powers of the Global South having a much bigger say. And the second advantage is that the World Bank has, over time, attached more and more conditions to its loans. Sometimes it's seen as an onerous set of conditions by Global South states. The NDB has a slimmer set of conditions that are necessary for loans to be approved, relatively easier perhaps, and less impinging on sovereignty questions of Global South states. So it's attractive, but still it has a long way to go before it becomes a truly major lender.
So, Ibrahim, if Brics financial institutions expand further, could it create an alternative financial system that would be immune to Western sanctions and render Western-dominated rules ineffective, of course, in the long run?
I think, as Sarang says, that it is a medium to long-term view. It does not have the deep pockets, but it can certainly use what it has to really kickstart parts of the economy through, for example, targeted investments in the infrastructure that makes these countries' economies moving. And so, for example, in renewable energy, in South Africa, there will be a loan to Transnet that would be able to get things to the harbors, to upgrade the harbors. So it's really looking at focusing it on the binding constraints of some of the Brics members rather than a wide-ranging lender. And as Sarang also says, it has less conditions and it has the backing of the sovereign fund of the countries involved. So I really think that this is going to be more in the next few years a boutique lender as opposed to a general lender in the Brics countries.
So, Sharang, is Saudi Arabia as well as Iran's membership to the grouping signaling the beginning of a new era? I mean, can we say that this is the end of the petrodollar? And how do you think this will eventually restructure the global financial system?
It's too early to call the end of the petrodollar. The dollar has been is a dominant currency on a lot of fronts, certainly on trade and also in terms of reserves. And that will continue for some time to come. But these are signals that are coming. There is a demand for ways to create, not to replace the dollar so much entirely, but to create alternatives. And mainly because countries are starting to feel uncomfortable that the dollar hegemony can be used to do things beyond trade and investment. That is to levy sanctions, unilateral sanctions, sometimes that go against their interests, that are extraterritorial and so forth. And so they're looking for, again, alternatives, not trying to replace or go against the West as much as create these alternative structures to give them more options.
So, Ibrahim, how Iran and Saudi Arabia's memberships to the Brics what would that mean for the changing dynamics of the world politics?
I think that, you know, when South Africa joined BRICS, it was also a member of IPSA. And so as BRICS, we are emerging markets. As IPSA, we were emerging democracies. And so keeping those two thoughts in the same head and separate means that we can have Iran and Saudi Arabia in one emerging market, a mechanism like BRICS, but they may not necessarily agree on being emerging democracies or have ideological overlaps in their value systems. And I think that says to me that BRICS is interest-based on economics rather than ideologically based on what are the kind of things, except that we have one thing, that we are not any longer tolerant of a unilateral world in which trade, the dollar, and all of those things are used for the US to decide who are its favorites and who are the ones that they will go after and then pull all of us in at the same time. Maybe the next step is the expansion and the reformation of the United Nations, especially its Security Council, because that's where a lot of power lies.
Yes. So Sharon, very quickly, how do you think Western alliances and economic groupings are monitoring the latest developments?
I think from the US perspective, the US has largely ignored BRICS in its official statements. There was a statement recently by the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, pointing to the diversity of interests. And he also said this is not going to be a rival. In that sense, he's right. I think many of the states, including the new ones that Mr. Rasool pointed out, don't want to be rivals to the US. But I think it is time for Washington and its very close partners in Europe to start reading the signals that are coming out of these summits like BRICS. The fact that it's expanding should be a signal to up their game, to go back to the drawing board a little bit and improve their policies towards the global south broadly.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.